Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our second Masterclass workshop series, How to Write About Music and Art for Publication with Tasha Hefford. I am Hannah Imam, and I'm the spoken word manager at CITR, and I'll be facilitating this workshop today. For folks who don't know, CITR is a campus and community radio station at the University of British Columbia. CITR has partnered with Community Arts Council of Vancouver to provide you with this very exciting and very fantastic workshop series happening online every Tuesday and Thursday till March 30th. So I hope to see you at other workshops as well, and we will pop the link in the chat. A few housekeeping things before we begin. Remain muted throughout the workshop, please. This event has closed captioning, and you can enable that by clicking live transcript. We will have a Q&A session at the end, and you can ask your questions then, either by unmuting yourself or putting your question in the chat, and I can ask your question on your behalf. This event will be recorded and later uploaded to our YouTube channel. So in case you miss any of it, you can, or you need to go and revisit any of the knowledge, you can always do that. And showing your video is encouraged, but you can go off camera if that is more comfortable for you. Now, before we begin the event, I am going to do a brief land honoring, and I want everyone to just take a moment and reflect on why it is important to do so and what it means to honor the lands we reside on. This workshop is taking place on the unceded traditional and shared territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations in the city colonially known as Vancouver, and we honor the historic and continual care of this land by our host nations. Media and art practices have traditionally been rooted in white gaze and colonial narratives. CITR and Community Arts Council of Vancouver understand the power of sharing stories and a responsibility to do so ethically, as well as actively push for more equity in the community arts sector. Now, with that, I will pass it on to Kristen, who is the Executive Director at Community Arts Council of Vancouver, to say a few words before we begin with the workshop.
Hi, everyone. I realized that Tasha left.
Yeah. Oh, Tasha's here.
Oh, okay.
You'll have to make her the co-host.
Okay, here we go. Okay, sorry.
Of course, the Wi-Fi has to go down at this exact.
That's okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our workshop today. My name is Kristen Chung. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm the Executive Director here at Community Arts Council of Vancouver. Our mission is to further the development of community arts throughout Vancouver, and we've partnered with CITR and Discorder Magazine for the past few years as part of our Vancouver Outsider Arts Festival, and we're looking at new ways to serve our shared community through this workshop series. And we'll do a Q&A at the end. We'll also send a survey at the end too. So if you could give us some feedback to improve and just let us know what you're interested in learning about, that would be really great. So now I'll pass it on to Tasha. Thanks.
Great. Awesome. Okay. Sorry about all of that. Thank you everyone for coming. I want you to imagine like a quiet MIDI track playing in the background as we start this session on how to write about music and art for publication. I'm just going to quickly go through to my first slide where I want to talk a little bit about just who I am, because I think it's important to know where your information is coming from. I'm someone who comes from an arts background. I have my Bachelor of Fine Arts with a major in critical cultural practices from Emily Carr. So that was a couple years ago now. I've since made a big transition into writing, into media journalism. And I recognize that it's like quite a privilege to have gone to university in the first place, but I want to also note that I'm pretty self-taught in this arena. And I am now the editor of Discorder magazine, so I come with like a good 3 or 4 years of knowledge of doing this specific job. So I think it's important just to note that that this is also going to be like a super Spark Notes, like quick little workshop that hopefully there's something that you can take away that's of interest to you. I don't imagine that any of these topics, which are things that people study for, 4 to 5 years in university, are things that I can get through in an hour. But at the very least, if there's something that you've written down in your notebook that you take with you going forward, that I feel like I've done my job. So onward to our learning objective, which is to say I'm going to offer an introduction to the basic formulas behind writing live music reviews, album reviews, and exhibition reviews, so I can put my degree to use, haha. I'm going to introduce a few ways in which to augment and customize these formulas, because nothing is good if it's just going to stick to a formula, even though you should know the rules before you break them. And then I'm going to do a little sort of like brief primer introduction to ethical frameworks, including person-centered language and situated knowledge. And then I have a short little slide on some tips on how to get started. Primarily, this comes from my experience, how I got started. There are so many ways to get started, but I think that's something that maybe people coming to one of these things would like to know, like, how did you get started doing what you're doing? So I'm going to try and answer that question. And then we have a Q&A. Be nice to me. Okay, onwards to the formulas. All right, so it's my beautiful slide introducing all of the ways in which we can really codify these things. So the first one being the live music review. Discorder does this a lot. We call them real live action. And a good way that I like to offer new writers to this genre to, like, kind of give them a backbone going into it. You want to start with your introduction, your sort of set the scene. This is kind of like your narrative moment. And your introduction should include the title, the venue, the date of the concert, names of the musicians. You may also include details such as the neighborhood, the crowd. Don't be snide about the crowd. This is advice. Past events that have happened. Anything that will give viewers that are unfamiliar with the area a better idea of where the concert took place is good for your introduction. You're going to want to follow up with your description, where you sweat the small stuff. You go over the set list. You go over specific instrumentations. I usually tell my writers to write down observations of the performance and use that as fodder. You want to make sure that you get the titles of songs played, the names of musicians, basic and brief information about the band, maybe their discography, and importantly, your reaction to each piece. Then you move on to your evaluation, where you take the small stuff, but with more context. Based on your notes, this is where you would talk about what made attending the show worthwhile. What about the experience was new, different for you? Expand on your writing by augmenting it with relevant facts, and how, in your opinion, the audience as a whole responded. I like to think following this conclusions can be fairly straightforward, but I will offer a little bit of help in this, because sometimes, closing a thing is hard. I get that. So is titling a thing, but I say that you should usually close both your opening narrative. If you entered this with like a very descriptive scene of, like, you entering the venue, take that and just end that story, or wrap up your evaluation. You can kind of go either way. So that is like your basic review formula. I'll get into how to, like, make these a little bit more augmented and more fun later, but onwards to the album review. Another Discorder staple, also kind of how I got my start in the media journalism world, but the basic outline is your description, which doesn't need a narrative intro, however you can, but this one is just starting with the granular details, your album title, your band name, the year this came out, the label it's on, history if applicable. Something I like to make note of is to make sure that it's in present tense, i.e. you want to say death metal that soothes the soul, not death metal that soothed the soul. This is happening presently, and people can listen to an album whenever, so keep that in mind. The analysis, of course, is you taking those details and furthering them. Something that I would say for this is like, this is your view and you should own that. Speak in first person without saying I think or in my opinion, and avoid using things like, or terms such as the audience or listeners or fans. Like, don't assume to know other people's thoughts. The reader is here to learn what your thoughts are, not your assumptions about the thoughts of others. So going through specific tracks and why they support the opinions you have is always a good thing. You don't have to list every song, though sometimes people do, just, you know, for clarity. Another thing I say for the analysis moment is make sure you listen to an album a lot. And I know that's kind of obvious. Take a lot of notes, once again, very obvious, but I think they could be useful later in the writing process because a review should have evidence, and in music, evidence is found in like deep immersion. So there's the analysis. Conclusion, summarize by pulling a thought from your analysis and just drive that point home. I think it's pretty straightforward. You don't really need to tie up any narrative loose ends from the beginning, but rather I think it's important to find something that you brought up in your analysis and just really make sure that you made that point clear. So that's our sort of like very structural approach to the album review. Now I have my art slide, which I could go into great detail about, but I won't. Discorder, of course, has format guides for all of these things, and this is where I'm pulling a lot of my information from. So email me if you'd like that, maybe not. We start with a description. So in the description, you need to first establish a clear context. Most of the time, this is written in first person because it's you going to the show. And this is the part where I like to say you really hold the reader's hand a little bit. You imagine that you're explaining what the exhibition is like to like a literal alien. Like imagine you're writing to your mom or someone who's picking up a Discorder in a coffee shop like 2 months after this exhibition has passed. Like you're really just going to go through the motions. And you want to include things like the artist names, their pronouns, bios, the gallery name, the show name, the curators, if any. If there are curators, they will make themselves known. And the mediums. So the medium, you probably know this, I may be being redundant, but that refers both to the type of art like paintings, collage, digital, print, as well as the materials used to make it. So keep that in mind. You also want to talk about the content here. Some works are really clear in what they depict or represent, so you don't need to go into detail of what it means in a description, but you can certainly start by stating the content plainly, like it is a drawing of a cowboy, it is a bronze dolphin, that kind of thing. And then you want to make note of presentation, which is how a work is placed or displayed or framed or labeled. This all has an effect on how we understand it. This can even include where the gallery is located. So for example, they are unframed drawings, or it is a live performance of a shitty flute cover. Like those things really help contextualize work. And then we have an analysis, and that's the meaty center of the review. And this is where you've taken all the descriptive work out of the way and you begin to explore what it all means. This could look like identifying relationships between those parts that you already introduced and speculating on the relationship between this work and the larger art world, or this work and the world, etc. This is when you kind of are like bringing all those elements together. And then in the conclusion, you ultimately let the reader know if you thought all of these parts came together successfully. That, in a nutshell, is an exhibition review. I hope I didn't make it seem complicated, because it really isn't. A lot of the time, this relies on you just, perceiving the work and having, larger thoughts about it and how it kind of like relates to other things. But we'll get into that a little bit later, because now that I've done the heavy lifting of talking about all those like hard formats, I have a couple things that at least I look for personally in writing about this kind of thing and with my work at Discorder, things that I think make it good, even though we don't deal in absolutes like that. Yes, criticism versus critique. Disorder is not contrary to critique, though we seldom get it. So I think knowing the difference between offering critique and leveraging criticism is really important here. Critique being something that is descriptive, focuses on the artist's, musician's goals. It's specific and focused on solutions, i.e. the writer could use less adjectives to strengthen their prose. That would be classified as critique. Whereas criticism is fairly blunt and it focuses on the critic's goals, so your goals when writing it. For example, I did not enjoy listening to the third track, and at its best, I think criticism places blame and determines the work good or bad. I think critique also puts a lot of the goals to test in the piece. So you ask yourself, what did the artist intend with this song? Was it successful in getting there? Did it fall prey to tropes? If so, which ones? All those things fall under proper critique. Criticism kind of cuts the statement quite short. Knowing the difference between those things is really helpful when you're writing an analysis or an evaluation. I don't think that that means that, you know, anytime you enter into writing something like this, you have to be overly positive. So this is a good way to temper your criticisms, should you encounter them. I have a good example of this because examples are helpful. This was written by Marcus Fung. It was in our under review section. It was on Kamikaze Nurses Stimuloso. They write, each member's contribution accumulates in an imposing wall of sound that rattles the mind. However, Stimuloso can feel repetitive at points, except for the distinctive opening and closing tracks. The bulk of the album feels like it's the same idea repeated, despite its extensive vocal and instrumental range. Certainly isn't a bad idea, but after a couple of tracks, the same driving drum beat and dissonant guitars, it's bound to lose some punch. To maintain the momentum they established at the start, the band would have done well to switch up the formula a bit. And this is 2 paragraphs in, and of course he ends it with a conclusion that sort of takes this all into an account, but I think it's a really good example of how to leverage critique over just being like, I didn't like the, you know, later half of the album. The next thing I have is just something that seems quite obvious, truly, but it's really important when you're writing reviews and responses to things, is to make like diverging connections. And sometimes as writers, we get really focused on writing like lush descriptions, on using a lot of adjectives, and I fall prey to such things as well. But finding adjacent objects to talk about or connections is always very important. So I'm just going to read straight from this because me ad-libbing it will be worse. A response is a piece of writing that speaks adjacent to something else, a central event, album, exhibition, or book. A response to a piece of music, for example, can be a fictional narrative that is tangential to the lyrics or sounds present. The kind of writing we love to receive in this format is willing to take risks, make diverging connections to broader engagements with social, cultural, and political spheres, and takes liberty to have fun with what you're responding to. So in conclusion, why is the chosen topic, event, piece underexplored? Or if it has been explored, what is your spin on it? Another tip that I have for this is when you are first writing your piece, try and make your first paragraph somewhat tangential. I have a good example of this following up this slide, but I will say that like if you start with something that is your like little tangential piece that you're going to be speaking around as your intro, and then your second paragraph comes in with kind of like the meaty goods, all the like information, it's a really good way to like weave in that like deeper connection early on. And this is what it would look like. Brendan Reed wrote a review of Tip of Your Tongue a couple years ago for a special edition issue. I've always loved this interview because of the way that he does this. And he starts off by saying, much is needed to stand out in the world of food writing. Along with security, love, and oxygen, food is one of the essential needs of human existence. And as a result, countless authors have mussed up upon its significance. Recipe writing is a particularly saturated corner of this market. Recipes thrive in the online world, and most are accompanied by paragraphs of personal backstory and pop-up ads, which do all they can to prevent the reader from getting the information they came for in the first place. So him bringing up how food blogs tend to have a little bit of a personal essay before you even get into the recipe, I think is a great way of starting this review of a sort of like art recipe book, so that introducing the tangential really early on in the piece, I think is a great way to make sure that you make those connections, that you get like a really wide-ranging Venn diagram with many crossovers. Well, actually, maybe not many, maybe just keep down like 3. Don't get too crazy. Now that we've gone over the format, and I've kind of given some tips as to things that I think make writing really interesting, I want to go over a few guidelines for making sure that your work is as equitable as possible. I think words have an incredible power for destruction, oppression, healing, liberation, and creativity. And I understand language to exist on a spectrum from actually hateful to profoundly powerful, and that we should always strive to use language in the most life-affirming ways possible. There is also no true objectivity. Like, objectivity is the ideology of the status quo. So some of these things I think will feel a little bit redundant, but we want to look over seeking out unquestioned language, opting for gender-neutral terms, using person-centered language, and avoiding appropriative language, just in these very quick slides, which I understand is weird, but people study this forever, and I'm going to go through it in a couple minutes. Here's the extended remix. Unquestioned language here, I think, is just a stand-in for everyday language, which is often unobtrusive and benign. However, everyday language can be rife with subtle clues that we value into our speech. Unquestioned language often asserts norms around what and who is valuable and what and who is not. So examples of this that I find particularly in music writing is when people use the term frontman instead of front person, or girl band, or female guitarist, words which limit an artist to their identity. Gender is not a genre, but these are things that become quite colloquial and we just use them without thinking. So those are the moments of unquestioned language that, like, I would really encourage writers to interrogate. It's easy to slip into it. Ain't no one's fault. You have an editor for the most part. So at worst, defer to your editor, but try not to use it to begin with. The other one is a faction of unquestioned language, which is appropriative language, which is to borrow blithely from other cultures. It's up to media makers to dismantle colonial narratives. So try to avoid terms like Vancouver native and instead use Vancouver based. These are things that come up a lot in media journalism. And then my last one is to use person-centered language. And I think something to really make clear about this one, because it can get kind of cloudy, is that everyone has the right to define themselves in whatever way feels best and most authentic to them. And identity is complex, and it's way too complex for a rule like this to work without exceptions. So there will be. Once again, defer to your editor, defer to your friends. But as a general rule, put the word person first before the disability or condition in order to emphasize those that are being referred to as people first, not just diagnoses or disabilities. That's a general rule for person first, but of course, people will generally talk about themselves as Black, not people who are Black, or women, not people who are female. So, kind of work your way through this accordingly. And that is what I have for this slide. I have a couple little things for getting started if this is of interest to anyone. I think something that's really important when you're getting involved in media journalism, or maybe writing in general, be open to writing about things that you're not already invested in. I know that sucks, and I also do not like doing it, but I personally got my start writing about theater, of which I know nothing about, but it is kind of interesting as a writer to be put in scenarios that you're not familiar with or not incredibly knowledgeable, and try to get out of your head with feeling as if you need to know everything about a subject before you can even talk about it. It may be interesting just to immerse yourself and see what arises. Another thing that is sort of adjacent to this is to volunteer to write for lit mag blogs. There are quite a few of them. I would recommend Prism or Room. They all have blogs, and they are often looking for people to review books or to review shows and events and things. And you could reach out to the editors directly and see if they're taking on anyone. This is something that I have done, and it was really cool and really fun, and I got a lot of free books out of it. So there's that. The next thing is to pitch to local newspapers and mags. This one is like a shameless Discorder plug, but I mean, it feels necessary. You can reach out to the masthead or the editors of magazines, honestly, within Vancouver, but also outside of Vancouver, maybe even outside of Canada. Everything is sort of scattered and you know, globalization. So you can do these things. You don't have to like keep yourself situated in Vancouver. By pitching, I would say first reach out and see what they're looking for. Most places are open to pitches, and most places have a specific way in which they like to receive them. So certainly ask for those things first, but you can say that, you know, I recently saw a blank band here, and I would like to write a review, a feature, whatnot on them, and just be really clear about your goals, because chances are the people behind the inboxes are going to be looking at them really fast. So just do the thing where you email someone. It has worked for me. I don't know if it'll work seamlessly every time, but that seems to be the advice that I was always given. And annoyingly, it's the advice that I am now espousing back, that you just have to reach out and ask. SADMag is another really good one here. They also have a blog. So if you are not able to cover stuff in the magazine, they certainly have a lot of space on their blog where they will assign you with shows to go to, artists to talk to, and that kind of stuff is really fun and really romantic to do. And the last one, I think I already said, you should reach out to publications that are outside of Vancouver, because you can. There are a lot of course, literature magazines that across Canada, like Filling Station is a really good one, that are open to exciting and creative writing, and writing that, you know, is about not just like chapbooks or things in the literary scene, but comedy and film. And there's a lot that they're looking for to fulfill those blog spaces. So as a way to get involved, at the very least, you can do that, and then you can kind of see what other opportunities arise from there. Those are the ways that I got involved here, just having an arts background. So that's the kind of thing that I like to suggest. I hope that this wasn't too fast, because I am now going to move on to my question and answer page. And you know what, if we do need to revisit a slide, as they are pretty heavy slides, we can certainly do that, because I believe we have quite a bit of time still. Hina, do you want to lead the question and answer session?
For sure. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you, Tasha, for this very informative workshop and your beautiful slides and animations.
I worked really hard.
I hope everyone enjoyed this workshop and hopefully learned something new today. And if you have time to complete the short survey that Kristen mentioned, we would appreciate your feedback. Now it is time for the Q&A. Please stick around if you can, and this portion of the workshop will not be recorded.